Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be able to talk about a work of art that Phillip, Meredith, and I have been contemplating for a long time, been working on behind the scenes, and which made its debut in Japan in 2012. But we hope this evening, first of all, that you'll be able to see the painting, enjoy the painting, and learn a little bit more about it, but that you will also be privy to some of the conversations that have been taking place for 5 years before 2012. And also from this lecture, we hope that it'll give you some clues as to how to look not only at this painting, but other paintings in our collection. The painting right now, for those of you who have not visited the galleries yet, is on view in Gallery 178. It's a small focus show for a very large painting, which, as Jasmine mentioned, is over 35 feet long. It had been on view at the museum. I think the most recent here at the museum was 1991, when my predecessor, Money Hickman, put it on a display celebrating the centennial of our department. And he did a small Shōhaku exhibition in the galleries. But for reasons that Phillip will explain later, it had not been out on view since that time in our own galleries. And we took it to Japan in 2012, where if you were in Tokyo at the time, you would have seen banners all over Tokyo with the dragon looking out at you, or in Osaka in three-dimensional form greeting you in different places. But by the time the tour was over, it went to 4 different museums in Japan. It had been seen by over 1.2 million people. So it's a very well-beloved dragon wherever it goes. It is also a dragon that, even before it made its way to Japan, I was getting letters from Murakami Takashi. Some of you may well know him. He's a quite well-respected and celebrated contemporary Japanese artist who heard that we were going to have the dragon on in Japan and said, "I'd like to do something. Could I display some piece of my art with it?" And I said, at this point, it's a little too late to make those plans, but he went ahead and did his own dragon versions, which you see on the screen right now, his red version and his indigo blue version, which he did in 2010. His artwork, as Phillip will explain to you, is done in ink on paper, but Murakami did his translation in acrylic on canvas. Well, this piece has been very exciting for contemporary artists, but you might find it surprising that it was actually collected here for the museum in the 19th century by one of our greatest benefactors of our department, William Sturgis Bigelow, who was in Japan from 1882 to 1889. At the time that he was in Japan, Shōhaku was not very well known. In fact, very few people collected him. But Bigelow had his own particular widespread interest in Japanese art. You can see here on the screen, he not only gave us textiles and paintings, but also swords and paintings. William Sturgis Bigelow was a man way ahead of his time, because really the paintings by Shōhaku were very little known. And very fortunate for us, because Bigelow and his colleague Ernest Fenollosa, who you see here in this slide, were able to acquire for themselves and later for the museum the largest collection of Shōhaku paintings. And we now have 35 paintings that we can confidently attribute to Shōhaku. I think if you go to our webpage, they'll tell you that we have 50, and that is because recent scholarship has raised questions about some that might have been done by schoolworks, although he did not have an official school, but by people who found his eccentric style to be very fascinating. And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on Shōhaku, but we can confidently say that we have a collection of 30 fabulous paintings. And here you can see it again in the galleries. One thing that one talks about Shōhaku is it's hard to separate fact from fiction. He himself was very intent, and some of you who may have read Sebastian Smee's Frame by Frame in the Globe will have seen the reference to Keith Richards, which doesn't usually get mentioned in the context of Japanese art very often, but Sebastian suggested the kind of personality that Shōhaku had, and Shōhaku himself was very, very intent on creating his own persona. He would write that he painted while drunk, and you can judge after this lecture whether you think he actually did or he didn't. He also created lineages for himself. He was actually born into a Kyoto family, as Jasmine mentioned at the introduction, born into a family that was not an artistic family, but in Japan at the time, belonging to an artistic lineage was very, very important for patronage. And so Shōhaku himself invented one. He said he was a member of the Soga school. The Soga school is a school of ink painters that had established themselves in the Zen temples in the 15th century. They had largely gone, their school had sort of declined. There were one or two artists who I'll mention, you'll see later on in the lecture, who did pick up the Soga name, but it was not the prestigious name that by the 18th century when Shōhaku was painting, that it certainly had been in the 15th century. But he claimed the Soga school as being a descendant of the school. And for the Soga school itself, he made up wild tales, saying that they painted for the Ming emperors, or that they also were descended from the Soga brothers, who are well known from 12th century tales of having done very valorous samurai deeds. So he fabricated this persona for himself. And as you can see from some of his paintings, you can see that people were inclined to believe them because he was a very eccentric artist in his own right. And this is one of the earliest paintings we know to be done by Shōhaku in our collection. It's in our collection. It's called Kume the Transcendent, and it tells the story of a sort of eccentric individual of his own who had the ability to fly, and while he was flying one day, he happened to spy a beautiful woman washing her feet in a riverbank, and he was so smitten, he fell out of the sky and landed, and they became married. And you can see this very eccentric figure here, standing in front of a screen with sort of household implements around him. But I think you can see the nature of why people consider Shōhaku to be such an eccentric artist. Look at the knife that's dangling up above his head. Look at the figure with its sort of demonic gaze. But also look at the brushwork that he's done, this brush with this pooling of ink that suggests the metal, the glistening of the metal, and just the touches of gold here and there, and these staccato strokes that he will use for rocks, he'll use for foliage. You'll see this throughout his painting. Here's another example of Shōhaku's work that's in our collection, The Four Sages of Mount Shang. A painting that's done later in his career, the story of four sages who, because they don't believe in the righteousness of the government, retreat to the mountains. And these are considered to be paragons of virtue in one sense, and Shōhaku interprets them as four men just totally inebriated, drinking underneath the pine trees. And I think you can gain a sense of just how much he has transformed this iconography. If you see and I'm sorry, the slide is a little blurry, but it is a screen in the Tokyo National Museum dating to the early 16th century, more conventional painting of the four sages, same pine tree here in the landscape, but if I show you these comparison, you can see if you compare this figure here, an elderly gentleman with his robes here standing next to the pine tree, and then you look at Shōhaku's figure, I think you can get a sense of the humor, the excitement. And then if you look at his brushwork, this is what he does with the pot right next to one of the sages here. This brushstroke that just wraps around and declares the space. Or this may be hard for you. If we took some details of the screen today, it may be hard to read this, but if I point out the details, I think you can read, this is the back of one of the stages with the squiggly line, bold ink line, hit the back of his head and that little hat that he's wearing. So it feels so fresh that you can understand why a painter like Murakami Takashi would respond to it. It really responds with something that for us is very contemporary. And you have to realize, though, that he is very much an 18th century painter working in Kyoto at the time. If you go into the galleries, you'll also see that this painting by Shōhaku of a hawk, and Phillip will go into more detail about this painting, but I just want to show you, again, the iconography of a bird underneath a tree on a rocky outcliff is not unusual. We have another painting that we sent to the Masterpieces exhibition here at the top, a screen done to this in the early 17th century by Soga Shōhaku. Again, similar iconography with a rocky outcrop, a tree here. It's not much different from what one finds in Shōhaku's work, but I can have you look at the detail of the hawk itself. You'll notice in Shōhaku he's got very expressive eyes, the expression in them, and then the way he handles his ink. Just look at the feathers that you have here on the back of the bird. Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the iconography that one finds and the related why the dragon and how the dragon, how we should see the dragon in light of earlier paintings. Sometimes it's difficult to read this dragon, so I thought I'd just mention how to go about reading it. If we look at this painting from right to left, you've got the signature and seal here, and then these waves that erupt around it. And there's the tail of the scaly tail of the dragon here. Phillip will explain to you that there are some sections of the painting that are missing right here, but here you get the face of the dragon, its whiskers that come out like this, a claw, and Phillip will describe what is missing in between, but here is one claw here, the head, a horn that goes behind it, another claw here, set of claws here, and then you've got these clouds that are in the background, these black, murky clouds from which the dragon appears. Now again, the idea of a dragon is not unusual. It's something that at least in Japanese paintings, in Japanese temples, they had paintings that had come from China that very much informed the idea of the dragon, and I show you on the screen a pair of paintings of a tiger and a dragon by the Southern Sung painter Muchi, dating to the 13th century, and these are sort of iconic paintings in the history of Japan. They come from the continent and from the Asian continent to Japan, very much treasured by the military rulers in Japan. They're enshrined in Daitokuji Temple and in Kyoto, and they become an inspiration for artists. And people knew about these particular paintings that were inscribed, and you can see down in the corners of them the inscription. For the dragon, which is on the right, it says, "The dragon rises and causes clouds to appear." So that again is standard iconography of dragon and clouds. "The tiger roars and the wind impetuously blows." And you can see these are paintings that have been very much beloved, that come out for special occasions at Daitokuji, but it's also inspired later artists. So you have a pair of screens that we also sent to the Masterpieces show in Japan. These screens dating 1606 by Hasegawa Tohaku. Tohaku was very interested in the paintings that Muchi did of various subjects, but here you see his rendition in screen form of a dragon and a tiger. And then if you go to our galleries, you can see Shōhaku's interpretation of the dragon and the tiger, and just how far we have come with this swirl of fabulous ink here for the clouds and the suggestion of wave all at one time, and then the tiger. And I can only just put these two together and you can see. One is a roaring tiger that has the wind impetuously blowing with it and the bamboo going in the background. And then there is our paper cutout, totally deflated, totally lacking in energy, of Shōhaku's dragon. If Muchi's tiger is confident, ours is somewhat of a sheepish pussycat in comparison. But that's the kind of fun that Shōhaku has in his works. It is a great sense of humor that we can feel not only in the hand of the artist, but you can see in the way he treats his subject, his own personality coming through very strongly. The idea of a dragon on its own, we also find in Zen temples. You can see the ceiling painting here at a Kyoto temple, whirling dragon in the clouds. And so the idea of a dragon being in a temple setting, which is what we think where our painting came from, is not unusual. And Phillip will discuss in greater length what we know about where our dragon may have originated. And it's certainly also a subject that is well represented in Chinese paintings. There are lots of precedents for it, and this is a very well-known painting in our own collection, Chinese painting by Chun Rong, dating to 1244, of 9 dragons. And I think you can see some of the similarities in iconography. But the question is then, we see these forms where Shōhaku is looking at earlier works, very well aware of these works, so that, when he discusses himself as being part of a lineage, he is in a way being part of an artistic lineage because he has studied really hard paintings of the past. But he certainly adds his own twist to it. And what he adds to it is not only the humor that I've mentioned, but we hope that through this lecture you will also see just some of the techniques that he adds that give his paintings such an excitement. Details such as the way he uses ink in the background for the clouds from which the dragon appears. This stippling of ink, and someone asked later, was that something that was added later? No, that's very much part of the process in which Shōhaku paints. He prefigures Jackson Pollock by several centuries. This layering, and we can see when he talks about being drunk. If he is completely drunk, then he is a very well-practiced painter. Tanya Ueda, who is a member of the team, the conservation team that worked with Phillip, we were looking at this painting with a group of gallery instructors the other morning, and just trying to work the relationship out between what he left in reserve and what he did in ink, and then how he expresses his ink in broad strokes, and then other careful spattering, but very expressive spattering along the surface. Or if you look at these waves, these are waves that have a life of their own. They're very hard on one hand, but they're also very lively and expressive on the other. So these, when we look at Shōhaku's work, I want you to realize that he is grounded in tradition. He is a Kyoto artist. He's very well aware of what has preceded him, but he is unique. And the really weren't artists, although we know of painters who tried to imitate him. It wasn't like traditional schools of painting where one followed the master, because it would have been almost impossible to follow in the footsteps of a person like this. So now I'll turn it over to Philip, and he'll look at more the details about how we got the work ready for the exhibition in Japan, and give you another even closer look at these paintings, and then we'll take some questions afterwards.
So, what did we do with Shōhaku's dragon? I'd like to continue this presentation with an explanation of the conservation treatment that we carried out on the Shōhaku Dragon and Clouds painting and its companion piece, Hawk, both of which you can see in the museum at this moment. I want to tell you something about the format of these paintings and take you behind the scenes, and indeed behind the screens, to show you about our decision-making processes and the discoveries that came out of this project. Perhaps I should begin, though, by telling you who we are in conservation and what we do. The Asian Conservation Department is a division of conservation and collections management at the MFA, and it was established in the early 1900s by the curator Okakura Kakuzo. As such, it has the longest history of any of the 5 studios in North American institutions treating Asian paintings. It currently has a staff of 8 conservators with various areas of specialization, working in 3 studios here in this museum. And they're responsible for the treatment of over 150,000 paintings, prints, and drawings in the collection. Here you see one of the 3 studios. This one primarily used for the treatment of Japanese paintings, and where much of the treatment on the Shōhaku paintings was carried out. The majority of our work is done on artworks that have been selected for display, either in our own galleries or for loan to other museums. We assess the condition of artworks selected for exhibition, and if there are any problems that prevent its safe handling and display, propose and carry out the necessary treatment. For the purposes of the Japanese Masterpieces exhibition loan, over a period of some 5 years, we treated a total of 32 paintings, including Shōhaku's 8 dragon panels and the 2 hawk panels. Most Japanese paintings, which are on lightweight and vulnerable materials, such as paper or silk, have been mounted in one of 2 ways for display, either in the rolled, flexible formats for the hanging scroll or hand scroll, or in the rigid formats on lattice panels used for folding screens, and in the case of Shōhaku's Dragon and Clouds and Hawk, sliding door panels. Protective as these formats are, with time and use, they develop weaknesses in the structure, and they can pose problems for the safety of the artwork. In the case of the mountings that have reached this point, it's often necessary to disassemble the mounting, address any problems or damage in the artwork, and remount it so that it's stable and well protected for safe handling and display. Nearly all the paintings we work on have been remounted for the same reason at some time previously, and they're reaching the point where the cycle of repair and remounting is necessary. This means we must also address the question of how to treat old repairs carried out in the past, but I'll return to that later. To continue, I'd like to explain something about the characteristics of one specific panel format, the sliding door, or fusuma. Traditional Japanese architecture, such as this Kyoto temple, has few solid internal supporting walls. Instead, the internal division of the space into smaller rooms is achieved predominantly with partition panels or sliding doors known as fusuma. They have a lightweight cedar wood lattice core, covered with 8 or more layers of paper before the application of the painting, which is usually executed on paper or more rarely on silk. Any solid, immovable walls of either plastered or wooden board construction are also prepared with a similar multi-layered paper lining if paintings are to be applied to their surface too. The painting may be, as in the case you see here, panoramic, and it's not uncommon to see paintings on both sides of the doors, which allows for a change of theme or subject matter from room to room. Works can be monochrome ink paintings or rich polychrome works in mineral pigments with gold leaf embellishment. More modest interiors have sliding doors and walls covered in block printed or stenciled decorative paper. Notice how the width of the doors can vary, especially as in this case with grander buildings. The wider doors that you see to the right of the center are about 4.5 feet wide. The 6 narrower screens to the left of the center are the more usual domestic width of just under 3 feet. The height of the doors is usually just under 6 feet. Notice also how the doors have metal door pulls. They're set into the panels to allow the doors to be slid open and closed. The door panels themselves fit into shallow grooves cut into the beams of wood set into the floor and recesses in the horizontal beams above so that they slide smoothly and evenly past each other. Any screen may be opened for simple access between the rooms, or 2 or more doors can be pulled back to allow for simple access between rooms and can be pulled back to allow the space of one room to flow into the next. Alternatively, the fusuma can be completely removed to create an even larger and open area. The Museum of Fine Arts Boston has a number of sliding door or fusuma paintings that were collected during the late 19th century, but after they were taken from their architectural settings, all of them were removed from their panel mountings, and before they entered the collection, put into some other format for the purposes of display. This was the case with Dragon and Clouds. As Anne has explained, the work was acquired by the Museum of Fine Arts Boston from the collector William Sturgis Bigelow in 1911, and the photos you see here are reproduced from glass plate negatives from the museum archives. They were taken in 1912, 1 year after the acquisition of the work, and they show how they had been remounted. The paintings, you'll notice, have been hung sideways for photography. Let's go back to that one. There are a total of 8 sections you see here. Each section had been removed from its sliding door and cut and joined to make 4 pairs. The joined pairs had then been given heavy paper linings and white cotton borders around the perimeter. When we looked at them, we could see that at least 7 of the 8 separate parts of Dragon and Cloud had originally been mounted as fusuma, or sliding doors, as indicated by the losses in the paper where the finger pulls, or hikite, would have been fitted. The painting had unusually large and unexplained areas of loss, perhaps due to its hurried removal from its architectural setting in an already damaged condition. It's possible that the painting may have come from a neglected or abandoned temple following the Haibutsuki-shaku anti-Buddhist movement of the early years of the Meiji period between 1868 and 1874. This also explains perhaps why the paintings are a little shorter than they should be. About 5 inches has been trimmed away, mostly from the lower edge of the image, where sliding doors are often damaged by overzealous sweeping and cleaning. The painting remained in much the same condition until recently, initially rolled, as you can see by the 2 tail sections at the left of the photo. Just on the edge there. Records indicate the Dragon and Clouds was temporarily displayed once in 1967 to 1968 and again in 1991. For this purpose, they were treated remedially to put down flaking paper fragments and flatten distortions in the paper. After display, they were put back into storage, sandwiched between large sheets of plexi. This kept them free from further damage by rolling, but it required considerably larger storage space and made them difficult to handle and move. Prior to this, their most recent treatment, the paintings were still in embrittled condition, with flakes of paper lifting from the surface, separation of the lining papers, and heavy creasing remaining from previous years of rolling and unrolling. The decision was made to separate the painting into its individual sections and to remount them onto wooden lattice cores with paper sublinings in a style similar to that of the first mounting format as sliding door panels. This would return the painting to its original appearance and allow the work to be exhibited as well as stored in a safe and stable manner. Here you see the work after treatment on display for the first time following remounting on panels at the Tokyo National Museum in 2012 as part of the exhibition which toured Japan, Japanese masterpieces from the collection of the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. You can see that a central part of the composition between the continuous left 4 and right 4 sections is missing. As Anne said, you can see a talon from a much larger claw is just suggested here, and the dragon's whiskers, which would normally be quite long, have been cut short. It may be that the missing section between these 2 parts of the painting was attached to a wall and couldn't be removed as easily as the parts on sliding doors. It's quite possible that these 2, the left 4 and the right 4, were indeed on opposing walls in a much larger space, but we're not sure. We also don't know where the painting comes from. We believe that it's from a temple in the area close to Kobe, Osaka, where Shōhaku was active at the time this painting was produced. He was about in his 34th year when he painted this. But a lot of research hasn't come up with the results and told us where the paintings actually come from. Before we began work on this piece, we were concerned about the extent of losses in the original support, the paper that the painting was produced on, and the nature of some of the old repairs that had been made in the past. In several places, there was brushwork that appeared to belong to a different painting. If you look in the lower left-hand corner, you can see details that just don't really belong there, spots and grass-like lines with wave strokes painted over the top. As we've mentioned, Hawk, another work by Soga Shōhaku, was also treated for our loan exhibition, and I hope you can see the display to compare it with Dragon and Clouds. Although the style of the painting and its brushwork differs from Dragon and Clouds, the type and proportions of the paper used and the manner of joining are exactly the same for both works. This led us to conclude that both could have come from the same building, perhaps from either side of the same sliding doors. Unfortunately, only 2 sections of Hawk are extant, probably due to its having incurred more damage than the Dragon painting did. What was clear was that losses in Dragon and Clouds had been filled with paper taken from now missing sections of Hawk. Although the paper was unmistakably of matching sheet size and manufacture, the infills taken from the Hawk painting were darker in tone and carried brush strokes and imagery from the artwork. So do you see here these dots to suggest perhaps moss, or rocky marks, and these grassy brush strokes here you can see also in this dark infill that's been put into the Dragon painting. So when the decision was made to treat both paintings, it raised the question of what to do with the infills and the repainted sections that we were looking at. To keep all of the historical infills would have retained the distracting elements, the tonal mismatches, and poor brushwork that were so disfiguring to the appearance of the painting in its present condition. But to remove all the infills and retain only the original artwork would have severely broken up the image and made it difficult to read as a cohesive composition. Here you see how the painting would have looked if we'd removed all the repainted sections from the tail part of the Dragon painting and infilled them with a predominantly light-toned infill paper overall and a darker toned paper at the right. Group discussions between our curator Anne Morse and members of the conservation team were held to reach a consensus of agreement over how to proceed. When we infill old areas of loss and remove old repainted areas, we don't, as a rule, recreate the missing parts of the composition. Instead, we tone our infill patches so that they are tone lighter than their surrounding areas. We decided to remove the majority of background area in the disfigured infills, but to retain repainted sections where the brushwork was acceptable in terms of execution and worked successfully to hold the composition together. These areas were marked out and recorded and made by tracing onto large sheets of transparent mylar film. Here you see the painting before treatment with the disfiguring infills and some repainted areas which were rather good for keeping the composition. And here you see the painting immediately after relining with the removal of the unsightly old repairs. Here's another section of the painting just before treatment. Part of the claw had been repainted with weak brushwork, and the vigorous splashed ink technique of Shōhaku badly imitated with unnatural dots and washes. Although it's not clear in this photo, many of the old infills also had a conspicuously rough and abraded surface. Here's the painting after cleaning and selective replacement of old infills and inpainting and repainting. So far, I've been showing you photos taken before and after the treatment of the paintings. This is where I want to take you, as I promised, behind the scenes and behind the screens and show you something of the work we carried out. Both of the Dragon and Hawk paintings were notable for their overall poor condition. The paper they'd been painted on was discolored and degraded, probably a result of, in part, of the heavy sizing that had been applied to allow the artist to apply such a generous application of ink. Because of the absorbent nature of many Japanese handmade papers, it's normal to brush the surface with a mixture of animal glue and alum before painting in order to prevent liberal washes of ink from blurring and soaking into the paper. It was expected that some of the discoloration in the paper would be water-soluble, and so, if so, should be removed before any later wet treatments, such as relining and repasting onto a support panel where it might leach or soak into other areas. So the paintings were separated into single sections and sprayed with water to relax and allow the paper and its linings to be brushed out flat. Sheets of thin rayon fiber paper were dampened and applied to the face of the artwork to protect the surface and hold any lifting fragments into place, as you see here. Then we put lightweight blotting paper, which was dampened on both sides of the painting, turning the stack and replacing the blotting paper until no further discoloration was removable. You can see that a lot of discoloration here is coming out into this blotting paper, so we were trying to remove as much of that water-soluble discoloration as we could. Two layers of the heavy lining paper were removed from the back of the painting, and this was followed by the application of a temporary lining of paper to allow for easy removal and a strong, medium lightweight Japanese paper to support the embrittled artwork. After drying, it was possible to assess the slightly lighter color of the paper and prepare infill papers of a corresponding and suitable tone. Now, the paper that Shōhaku used for both these paintings is a heavy paper made from the fibers of the inner bark of the gampi tree mixed with finely powdered kaolin clay, known as maniaishi or maniai paper. This special paper is produced in the Nagio district of Japan near Kobe, and it was a popular choice for wall and door paintings in castles and temples from the late 15th century onwards. A similar paper, currently made by the Tanino family, was selected as the paper we needed for infillings. We chose a lighter weight of paper, which we lined with a medium weight Mino paper made in the Mino area, to allow for easier control during the shaping and handling of the infills. Color for toning was prepared from sticks of color pigments, dry earth pigments, and carbon ink sticks, ground down with water and the addition of a little animal glue. The color was applied with a wide, soft brush in repeated applications until the desired degree of toning was achieved. For infills in area with dark ink-washed background, more applications of carbon ink color were added. Infill papers of the appropriate tone were selected by consulting the damage map of the artwork, matching for color, then tracing and cutting roughly to size and marking for placing and position. If you notice the damage map in the right-hand photo up on the wall here, this is what we used to track the infills we wanted to keep and the ones we wanted to replace. For those previous infills in the painting that we wished to remove, but had background elements we wished to retain, we partially cut along the outline with scalpels to produce a clean and clear edge. The paintings were once again dampened and faced as before, and the temporary lining was removed along with unwanted old infills. And here you see on the left-hand side is an infilling that we were removing from the painting being taken away. We worked with the painting face down on a large sheet of plexiglass, as you can see on the right-hand side. This allowed us to lift it, to move it over a light source for illumination by transmitted light when required. A lot of our work is being done from the back. Anne was saying earlier on how good it is to see these paintings in the gallery and sometimes when they're inspecting them, but when we're working on a painting, we spend a lot of time looking at the back of it. Where a part of the old infill with repainting was to be retained, the partially pre-cut edge was completely cut through, from the back, again with scalpels, and the unwanted portion taken away. Newly prepared infills were dampened and pasted into place, as you see on the right side, with the excess margins reduced with tweezers. With infilling completed, The paintings were lined with 2 layers of medium-weight Japanese handmade paper. The fiber direction of the paper was horizontal for the first lining and vertical for the second, so that the linings would create a strong cross-grain effect. Before the application of the second lining, tears, splits, and heavy creases in the painting were reinforced with strips of medium-weight paper. And after their second lining, the paintings were stretched and dried flat, ready for affixing to their panels. For the remounting of the panels in the style of sliding doors, custom-made wooden lattice cores of lightweight, straight-grained Japanese cedar and black lacquered wooden trims were ordered from Japan. We pasted the cores with 6 linings of 8 layers of paper that are commonly used for folding screens and sliding doors to provide a light but stable support to take the paintings. To put the artworks onto the newly prepared cores, the back of each painting was pasted with a thin paste overall and a heavy paste around the edges. Then the prepared cores were lowered into place. The backs of the panels had been covered first with a plain silk fabric pre-lined with dyed paper. Both the painting and the lined silk were put on one immediately after the other, and the face of the painting was gently pressed down with soft paper to protect the delicate surface. Then the panels were dried overnight between thick woolen felts to slow down the drying process and prevent warping of the cores. After drying, the lacquered wooden trims were fitted. We chose to fit the same rectangular, regular lacquered wood trim on all 4 sides of the panels, rather than the overlapping side flanges and extended upper trim fitted to orthodox fusuma. Since our panel paintings wouldn't be displayed in an architectural setting with the grooves and runners used for sliding doors, our mountain makers produced discrete painted bronze hooks to support and display them in a museum context. See if you can spot them in the exhibition. They're hard to see. And since they would no longer be used as functioning doors, we chose not to use metal finger pulls, which would also obscure parts of the painting. In place on their support cores, the paintings were now ready for the final adjustments to the toning of the new infills we'd put in. The aim was to bring the infill to a level slightly lighter than the surrounding original. This proved more difficult in some areas than others, particularly where there was a strong contrast or variation from one side of the infill to the other. In this case, a slight gradation made the transition visually more acceptable. Stick colors and carbon ink sticks were used. In large areas of the dark background of Dragon and Clouds, we noticed that it had been painted with a coarse velvet-like black that was unlike the ink used in other parts of the painting. It may be that this was a type of ink known as kezurizumi, or shaved ink, made from scraping dried ink remnants from the production of stick ink and soaking them overnight in water. The resulting ink is thick, rich black that was used for painting paper lanterns and the production of inexpensive printed matter. Shōhaku clearly needed buckets of ink to do this painting, and as an artist working on his own, he probably welcomed this method of producing large amounts of black ink also as a time-saving device. During a previous treatment, sumi or stick ink had been used to paint over the scratches and abrasion in the painting surface. In this raking light on the photo, you can see clearly the difference. We hope we'll be able to remove some of these shiny old repairs that were put on in the past, but unfortunately it wasn't possible to remove the overpainting without causing damage to the original paint underneath. Fortunately, it only shows up in certain lights, in the raking lights. But since the stick ink we ground for use in toning the new infills had much finer particles and produced a shinier finish in areas where we required a coarse velvety black color, we tested alternative carbon black dry pigments. It was found that peach stone black, cherry stone black, vine black, and ivory black produced the required tones and matte finish we were looking for. And you can see in the test chart what a variety of blacks we were looking at and were available for consideration. The toning we put onto the painting infills was carried out by building up thin washes of color applied successively with soft brushes. The progress and degree of toning was constantly monitored and discussed by curatorial and conservation staff. We used sample patches, as you see here, to determine and agree upon the tone required for each infill. We had preserved all the old areas that we had removed from all the old repairs that we had removed from the painting, and as we progressed, areas that had been removed were reassessed and, as in this case, replaced. Here we felt that the removal of the dragon's chin created a break in the composition that was even more noticeable when adjacent panels were put together. The old infill was trimmed to size, the area to be infilled lightly humidified, and then the infill pasted back into place from the front. Well, I'm almost at the end of my tale. From this to this was a long and complex journey. With Dragon and Clouds and Hawk by Soga Shōhaku, throughout the treatment of what was a complex mix of original and later imagery, key factors were prior discussion and reassessment, as well as ongoing and later revision of what to remove and what to retain. Our aim had been to stabilize the condition of the paintings, to remove obtrusive and distracting repairs, whilst retaining repainting portions whose removal would have significantly affected the readability of the overall image and made them safe to be enjoyed and exhibited. We hope you feel that we achieved our aims.
This exhibition will be up until July 6th, which allows you plenty of time to come back over and over to see other aspects of the painting, but we hope this evening allowed you to at least get some insights on some of the choices that were made during the process of conservation, and will allow you to look at the painting in a little bit of a different light. But if you have any questions, Phillip and I would be glad to take them.
Hello. How long did the restoration take from start to finish? And what year and all?
Go ahead.
From start to finish, 5 years, not 5 years working every day, all day, because of drying periods, and we were working on several other paintings at the same time. But from the very beginning, I suppose, when we examined the paintings and discussed their treatment to when the exhibition opened, 5 years, over a 5-year period.
What's your guess about the number of panels that are missing?
Could be 4 small ones.
Yeah. We're not sure. Maybe 4 small ones. If you look at the scale of the painting and if I can point this out, that talon there, which comes from a much bigger claw. You have one talon here and a claw that takes up a second panel, which is very large, and if you look at the proportion of the whiskers in some of the other dragon paintings, they're extremely long. So we think 4 panels, perhaps.
If we could identify the architecture, it would make it a lot easier, but since we don't know what the original room configuration, one thought that has been proposed is that there would have been an altar, that as Phillip mentioned, that the panels that we do have would be on opposing walls, and that there would then be smaller sliding doors and maybe an altar in the center. And so it was like in a U shape, a U configuration, so that there might have been either smaller sliding doors or stationary doors on either side of the altar, but we're not 100% sure. I should mention that before we sent these paintings to Japan, there was a lot of speculation. In fact, NHK, which sponsored the exhibition, did a whole program where they were trying to go around the area where they thought these paintings had been created. They had a whole program of people tromping around to different temples saying, "We think we found the temple." They never found the temple, but at any rate, it made for good TV.
When you sprayed it with water, why didn't that affect the ink?
Carbon ink is usually very stable. There are pigments that we work on paintings that are extremely vulnerable, and we're very careful when we moisten them to make sure that they're consolidated and in place. Carbon ink doesn't usually run. We test our pigments before we do wet them, and when we do wet them, we wet them carefully.
Thank you. Regarding the iconography, the dragon is a symbol of enlightenment, especially in a Zen temple. And the dragon is created by a carp, a koi, swimming up a waterfall, and when attaining the pool up above is transformed into a dragon. And the right-hand side certainly looks like splashing water, as though he has just gotten into, or she has just gotten into the pool. And the enlightenment would be the brightening of the panels on the left, which seem somehow coming out of darkness.
The dragon itself has been not only within the Zen sect, but also in traditional Chinese painting. And so, yes, you do have this appearance of the dragon in clouds, which also dragons, in Japanese temples of all types, having dragons as protectors comes from the whole idea of water deities, protective water deities in Indian temples. But we do find it in secular paintings as well. But of course, there are many things that one can read into these paintings, and the dragon is one of those.
I had a question about the tigers that are represented on several of these screens. I've always been amused by the fact that they look like rather large house cats.
Yes.
Did tigers exist in Japan at any particular time?
No, tigers did not exist in Japan, and you will find many representations. Either they're looking at other paintings, like some of these artists looking at Muchi's paintings, or there were instances of skins that were brought to Japan, and tiger paws. We actually have from some artist studios tiger paws that we know that they had access to, but tigers themselves do not exist in Japan.
Hi, I was just curious, the work just seems so different from the other examples that you showed us from the time period. I was wondering if you have a sense for how the artist was received in his own time, and what the, I guess, critical or artistic response was to his work then.
It's two-pronged. There were, Shōhaku himself was known as he was celebrated and he was named in the painting registers as being a very accomplished painter, but he was also considered a very bizarre painter. But this whole tradition of eccentrics is something that happens in Kyoto, particularly during the 18th century. So it wasn't unusual for someone to be considered eccentric. It was something that could be admired. I think he was probably on one extreme of eccentricity, but it was the idea that one didn't do things in a conventional way, that one had an inner understanding rather than attention to more formal ways of looking at paintings, which is certainly something that the military aristocracy, when they had paintings done for them by artists such as the Kano school, which I showed you an example of, that would be more traditional painting, which follows much more of a formula. So people did in his own time admire him, but he certainly was not someone who had, like many of the Kano school painters, disciple upon disciple and people working under his direction. That didn't happen in Shōhaku's case.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you so much. What do you think made Bigelow so charmed by these works by Shōhaku?
Bigelow had very wide interests, and so he not only had some of our best Buddhist paintings, very conventional, beautiful, splendid paintings, but he also had an irreverence, must have had an irreverence, because he's responsible for many of the ukiyo-e paintings, or paintings from the floating world that we have in our collection, are prints, and we know that his colleague Fenollosa really looked down on these types of paintings, so we're pretty sure that Bigelow was the instigator in it. And if you look at some photographs we have of the time where Bigelow assumes like the hermit's dress, he was able to put himself into many different situations, and I think he must have had a great sense of humor that I think sometimes when you read Fenollosa's writings, erudite as they are, they don't have much of a sense of humor to them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.